Life's most precious moments often come disguised as ordinary days. In a quiet corner of Cedar Grove Park, where autumn leaves dance with possibilities, a single father's skilled hands would change not just a stranger's broken prosthetic leg, but both their destinies. Mike Turner never expected much from that Thursday afternoon, just another day of fixing things while watching his daughter play. Yet when a distinguished woman stumbled nearby, her prosthetic leg malfunctioning, his instinct to help sparked something extraordinary. He never asked her name, never sought recognition, just fixed what was broken and disappeared into the crowd. The next day, when a private jet touched down in their small town, no one could have predicted what would unfold. What drives a billionaire entrepreneur to offer her heart to a man who fixed more than just her ability to walk? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old toolbox sat on Mike Turner's workbench like a family heirloom, which in many ways it was. Its red paint had faded to a weathered crimson, chipped at the corners to reveal decades of faithful service. Every morning, Mike's calloused fingers would trace the initials JT scratched into its surface. James Turner, his father's mark on a legacy of fixing broken things. Today was no different, except perhaps in ways he couldn't yet imagine. "Daddy, my toast is ready," Emily's voice carried from the kitchen, pulling a gentle smile across Mike's tired face. At 8 years old, she had already mastered the art of making breakfast, though he wished she didn't have to grow up quite so fast. "Coming, sweetheart," he called back, closing the toolbox with practiced care. The morning light filtered through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the organized chaos of his workspace. Parts and pieces of other people's broken treasures lined the shelves. Old radios, vintage watches, and various mechanical odds and ends that folks in Cedar Grove trusted him to restore. The kitchen told a similar story of careful management. Emily sat at their small table, her school uniform already neat and tidy, dark hair pulled back in a slightly uneven ponytail that spoke of determined independence. 2 plates of slightly burnt toast waited on the table, alongside a jar of peanut butter that had seen better days. "I made yours too," she announced proudly, pushing his plate forward, "and I didn't use too much butter this time." Mike settled into his chair, watching his daughter spread peanut butter with intense concentration. "You're getting pretty good at this breakfast thing, kiddo, but remember—" I know," she interrupted with an eye roll that reminded him so much of her mother. "You can make breakfast too. But you work so hard, Daddy, and Mrs. Martinez says helping family is important." The mention of her third-grade teacher brought another smile to Mike's face. Mrs. Martinez had been a godsend this past year, understanding Emily's situation and offering extra attention when needed. "Mrs. Martinez is a wise woman. Speaking of which, did you finish that science project?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Almost. I just need to add the last part about how watches work. Can I show everyone your workbench today? For show and tell?" Mike glanced at his watch. His father's old Timex, restored countless times but still ticking. "We'll take some pictures after school, okay? That way you can show everyone without risking any of the pieces getting lost." The morning routine continued with practiced efficiency. While Emily gathered her school supplies, Mike packed their lunches, simple sandwiches and apple slices, with a small chocolate bar tucked into Emily's bag as a surprise. His own lunch would wait. There was a tricky restoration job waiting at the shop that would demand his full attention. The drive to school took them through Cedar Grove's awakening streets. Fall had painted the maple trees in brilliant shades of red and gold, and the morning air carried the crisp promise of change. Emily chatted about her upcoming science presentation, her words tumbling out in excited bursts between bites of her breakfast bar. "Daddy," she said suddenly, her voice taking on that serious tone that always made him brace for something profound. "Tommy said his dad makes more money fixing cars than you do fixing watches. But that's okay, right? Because you fix special things?" Mike's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. That's right, honey. Sometimes the most valuable things we do aren't about money. Remember what I told you about Great-Grandpa James? He fixed things during the war, Emily recited proudly, and sometimes soldiers would give him their special watches to keep safe until they came home. That's right. And every single one of those watches told a story, just like the ones people bring to us now. Every piece has a history, a reason it matters to someone. They pulled up to the elementary school, joining the line of cars, dropping off morning passengers. Emily gathered her backpack, then paused. Daddy, do you think Mum's watch will ever work again? The question caught him off guard, as it always did. Sarah's old watch lay in a special box in his workshop, its delicate mechanism a puzzle he hadn't yet found the courage to solve. Someday, sweetheart, when the time is right. Emily nodded, accepting this answer as she had many times before. She leaned over to kiss his cheek, then hopped out of the car with the resilient energy of youth. Love you, Daddy. Don't forget pictures for show and tell. Mike watched until she disappeared into the building, then sat for a moment longer, letting the morning settle around him. The toolbox in his trunk held more than just tools. It carried a heritage of caring for precious things, of understanding that value isn't always measured in dollars and cents. Starting the car again, he headed toward his small shop in downtown Cedar Grove. The Turner's Timepieces and Repairs sign needed repainting, but like everything else, that would have to wait. There were watches to fix, stories to preserve, and a living to earn. One careful repair at a time. Sarah Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, absently massaging her left leg where synthetic met skin. 62 stories below, San Francisco's financial district hummed with morning activity. A world away from her. Quiet thoughts. On her desk, a prototype prosthetic leg gleamed under the morning light, her company's latest innovation, a marvel of carbon fiber and neural interfaces that would change thousands of lives, if they could get it right. Ms. Chen? Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. The board is waiting in the conference room. Sarah squared her shoulders, a gesture learned through decades of proving herself in rooms full of doubters. I'll be right there, Claire. The prototype caught her eye again as she turned. Version 37.2. Closer to perfect, but not quite there. Like everything else in her life, it demanded nothing less than excellence. Chen Robotics hadn't become a billion-dollar company by settling for good enough. The conference room fell silent as she entered, 12 faces turning toward her with varying degrees of anticipation and concern. Sarah took her place at the head of the table, her movements deliberate and graceful. The result of years of refusing to let her prosthetic define her mobility. The clinical trials data, she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark, exceeded our expectations in every category except one. She pulled up the results with a gesture, letting the holographic display fill the air above the table. User comfort during fine motor adjustments still shows a 12% gap from our target. Marcus Webb, her head of R&D, leaned forward. Sarah, we're still leagues ahead of the competition. The market isn't my concern, she interrupted, gentle but firm. Comfort is everything. I won't release a product that's almost perfect. I won't have someone wake up every morning thinking about their prosthetic instead of their possibilities. The words carried weight coming from her. Everyone in the room knew her story. The childhood accident, the years of adaptation, the engineering, degree she'd earned while testing prototypes on herself. Chen Robotics had grown from her refusal to accept limitations, either in technology or in life. We'll miss the Q4 release window, Marcus pressed. The shareholders will understand that we're maintaining the standards that made their investments worthwhile in the first place. Sarah's tone ended the discussion. Give the development team whatever they need. I want solutions on my desk by the end of the week. The meeting concluded with action items assigned and timelines adjusted. As the room cleared, Claire lingered. with a tablet in hand. "Your schedule for the rest of the week." Sarah nodded, only half listening as her assistant rattled off a litany of meetings, interviews, and public appearances. Her mind wandered to the prototype, to the thousands of people waiting for a breakthrough that would change their lives. She thought of her younger self, determined to turn her challenge into an opportunity to help others. "And the Forbes profile photographer is confirmed for Thursday." "Cancel it," Sarah said suddenly. "In fact, clear my schedule for the next few days. I need to think." Claire blinked in surprise. Sarah Chen didn't cancel appointments, but the board expectations will have to wait. Sarah was all ready, moving toward her office, plans forming. "Have the jet ready tomorrow morning. I need a change of scenery." Alone again in her office, Sarah sank into her chair, feeling the familiar ache where her prosthetic connected. The wall of awards and accolades stared back at her. Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, Time's Most Influential, headlines celebrating the woman who revolutionized prosthetic technology. She reached down, making a small adjustment to her own prosthetic, an early prototype kept and maintained as a reminder of where she started. The movement was automatic, a gesture repeated countless times over 20 years. But today it sparked something different. A question about what she might be missing in the endless pursuit of perfection. Her phone buzzed with messages from concerned board members, reporters seeking comments, potential investors requesting meetings. Sarah ignored them all, looking instead at the prototype on her desk. Something was missing from the equation, something human that couldn't be measured. In laboratories or focus groups, the sun was setting over the bay, painting the sky in colors no technology could quite capture when Sarah made her decision. Sometimes, she reasoned, the best way forward wasn't in complex solutions but in stepping back, in finding perspective, in unexpected places. "Claire," she called through the intercom, "about tomorrow, make it a private flight. No staff, no security detail, just me." She didn't know it yet, but that decision would lead her to a park bench in Cedar Grove, to a chance encounter that would remind her that some things couldn't be engineered, only felt. Cedar Grove Park lived up to its name that afternoon, with maple and oak leaves creating a kaleidoscope of autumn colors across the playground. Mike sat on his usual bench, watching Emily navigate the monkey bars with determined concentration. His toolbox rested beside him, a habit born from years of finding purpose in fixing things, even during downtime. He'd just finished a complicated repair on Mrs. Davidson's antique music box, and the satisfaction of hearing it play perfectly again still lingered. Emily had called it magic, but Mike knew better. It wasn't magic, it was patience, understanding how things worked and caring enough to put them right. "Daddy, watch this," Emily called out, attempting a new gymnastics move she'd been practicing. Mike smiled, raising his hand in acknowledgement when a different sound caught his attention, a sharp intake of breath, followed by an unmistakable stumble. 20 feet away, a woman in a tailored business suit was struggling to maintain her balance. Most people were averting their eyes, that awkward human response to someone else's difficulty. But Mike saw what they didn't. The subtle mechanical issue with her prosthetic leg, the way the joint wasn't quite responding as it should. "Emily, stay on the playground for a minute, okay?" he called out, already moving toward the woman. She had managed to settle onto a nearby bench, her composed expression betraying only the slightest hint of distress. "Excuse me," Mike said softly. Approaching with the same careful respect, he showed the delicate timepieces in his shop. "I couldn't help but notice the calibration seems off on your prosthetic. May I?" The woman looked up, surprise flickering across her features. Most people pretended not to notice, or worse, offered unwanted pity. But this stranger was different. His eyes were focused on the prosthetic with professional interest, not morbid curiosity. "You know about prosthetics?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of carefully measured skepticism. Mike smiled, setting his toolbox down. "I know about mechanical things that need fixing. May I take a closer look? I think I can help." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Mike knelt beside the bench, his movements deliberate and respectful. "I'm Mike, by the way, Mike Turner." "Sarah," she replied simply, watching as he examined the joint with practiced care. "Ah, I see the problem. The micro-adjusters have slipped. Out of alignment. It happens sometimes with temperature changes." His hands moved to his toolbox, selecting tools with unconscious precision. "Do you mind if I—" Sarah gestured her permission, increasingly intrigued by this man who approached. Her high-tech prosthetic, with the same confidence he might show toward a kitchen appliance. "Daddy fixes everything," a small voice announced. Emily had wandered over, her natural curiosity overcoming the playground's appeal. "He even fixed Mrs. Martinez's coffee maker when it was totally dead." Mike glanced up with a gentle smile. "Emily, remember what we said about giving people space." "It's all right," Sarah said, finding herself charmed by the child's earnest expression. "Does your daddy really fix everything?" Emily nodded emphatically. "He says everything deserves a chance to work right again, even my mom's old watch when he's ready." A shadow passed across Mike's face, quick but noticeable. His hands remained steady, though, making minute adjustments to Sarah's prosthetic. "Try that," he said, shifting focus back to the task at hand. "The alignment should be better now." Sarah stood carefully, testing her weight. The difference was immediate. The subtle drag that had been plaguing her all day was gone, replaced by smooth, natural movement. "That's remarkable. How did you—" "Mechanics are mechanics," Mike said simply, packing away his tools. "Whether it's a watch or a prosthetic, it's all about understanding how things are supposed to work together. At least let me pay you for your time." Sarah reached for her purse, but Mike was already shaking his head. "No need, it was a simple fix." He smiled, warm but professional. "Just glad I could help." Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we get ice cream, please?" Mike checked his watch, his father's old Timex keeping perfect time. One scoop, then homework. As they turned to leave, Sarah found herself watching them walk away. The father and daughter headed toward the park's small ice cream stand, his toolbox swinging gently at his side. She tested her leg again, marveling at the improvement. In all her years of developing cutting-edge prosthetics, she'd never met someone who could diagnose and fix an issue so quickly, so intuitively. She pulled out her phone, hesitated, then opened her browser. "Turner's Timepieces and Repairs," she typed, making a mental note of the address in downtown Cedar Grove. Something told her she might need another repair soon, whether her prosthetic needed it or not. Evening settled over Cedar Grove like a gentle sigh, painting the kitchen windows in soft amber hues as Mike helped Emily with her homework. Her colored pencils scattered across the table, she was absorbed in drawing something with intense concentration. Her tongue stuck out slightly, just like her mother's used to when she was focused. "Almost done, Daddy," she announced, adding careful details to her picture. "I'm drawing the lady from the park. See, I made her leg special, just like you fixed it." Mike paused in washing the dinner dishes, drying his hands to look at Emily's. Artwork. The figure on the paper stood tall and elegant, with a simplified version of a prosthetic leg carefully drawn in silver pencil. But what caught his attention was how Emily had drawn the woman's smile, warm and a little sad, just like he remembered it. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart," he said, touching the drawing lightly. "Why don't we put it on the fridge?" Emily shook her head. "No, it's for her. When she comes back, she comes." She said it with such certainty that Mike felt something twist in his chest, that familiar ache of wanting to protect his daughter from disappointment. "Emily," he started gently, "sometimes people we meet in the park are just passing through. They have their own lives to get back to. But she's different," Emily insisted, adding final touches to the drawing. "She looked at you like Mrs. Martinez looks at Mr. Martinez when he brings her lunch at school." All soft and surprised, Mike turned back to the dishes, grateful for the excuse to hide his expression. "Time for your bath, kiddo. School tomorrow." Later, after Emily was tucked in with her favorite stuffed elephant and 2 bedtime stories, Mike found himself in his workshop. The small converted garage was his sanctuary, where the steady rhythm of fixing broken things helped quiet his mind. Tonight, though, his thoughts kept drifting to the afternoon's encounter. He opened his toolbox, his father's toolbox, and began his evening ritual of cleaning and organizing the tools he'd used. Each one had its place, its purpose. The micro-adjusters he'd used on the prosthetic needed special attention. The precision tools were sensitive to dust. As he worked, his eyes fell on the small wooden box tucked away on his highest shelf. Inside, carefully wrapped in soft cloth, lay Catherine's watch, the vintage Cartier he'd given her on their 5th anniversary, the one she'd been wearing when he shook his head, closing the toolbox with perhaps more force than necessary. "One broken thing at a time," he murmured to himself, his father's old advice coming back, as it often did in quiet moments. Across town, in her hotel suite, Sarah Chen was having her own evening of reflection. She'd cancelled her return flight, much to Claire's barely concealed distress, and now sat cross-legged on the oversized bed, her prosthetic removed for the night. Her laptop displayed research she'd compiled on Mike Turner, newspaper clippings about his repair shop, a few local business awards, a touching feature about his volunteer work, fixing children's toys at the community center. But it was the customer reviews that held her attention. They read like love letters to craftsmanship. "Mr. Turner didn't just fix my grandmother's clock. He restored our family's history. He treated my great-grandfather's pocket watch like it was a national treasure. The only person I trust with repairs that matter." She ran her fingers over her prosthetic, marveling again at how smoothly it now moved. In all her years developing cutting-edge prosthetics, she'd never encountered someone who could diagnose and fix an issue so intuitively, with such genuine care. Her phone buzzed, another message from Marcus about the prototype's delayed release. Sarah glanced at her own prototype sitting on the hotel desk. Version 37.2, with its perfectly engineered components and carefully calibrated systems. Yet something about Mike's simple, hands-on approach to her existing prosthetic had achieved what millions in R&D hadn't quite managed. Comfort without consciousness. She opened her tablet, pulling up a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered what she was about to do. The board would think she was crazy. The shareholders would panic. But Sarah Chen hadn't built her empire by ignoring her instincts. "Proposal for integration of traditional craftsmanship in modern prosthetic design," she typed, then paused. Below the title, she added a note. "Potential consulting partner, Turner's Timepieces and Repairs." In her mind, she could still see him, kneeling beside the park bench, those skilled hands working with such quiet confidence. More than that, she remembered how he'd looked at her prosthetic, not as a piece of advanced technology, but as something that simply needed understanding, and care to work as it should. From down the hall, she could hear the ice machine humming, a steady rhythm in the quiet evening. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd pay a visit to his shop. After all, even the most sophisticated timepiece occasionally needed a human touch. The corporate dossier on Michael James Turner lay open on Sarah's hotel desk, its contents spread out like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Claire had compiled it with her usual thoroughness: birth certificate, education records, business licenses, even old newspaper clippings from the Cedar Grove Gazette. But it was the photographs that kept drawing Sarah's attention. Mike at his shop's opening 6 years ago, ribbon cutting with a beaming dark-haired woman beside him. Mike receiving a community service award, holding a toddler Emily. Mike in more. Recent photos, alone at his workbench. His expression focused and peaceful. The progression told a story that the formal documents couldn't capture. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Marcus, still pressing about the prototype deadline. She silenced it, turning instead to the local newspaper article that had caught her eye. Local craftsman preserves more than just timepieces. The piece was from 3 years ago, not long after Catherine Turner's passing. It detailed how Mike, had kept the community's cherished possessions running during Cedar Grove's economic downturn, often accepting payment in installments or sometimes just heartfelt thanks. The reporter had quoted him, "Some things are worth fixing just because they matter to someone." Sarah found herself rereading that line, hearing it in his voice, that quiet certainty she'd witnessed in the park. Her hand drifted to her prosthetic, remembering how he'd approached it not as a piece of cutting-edge technology, but as something that simply needed understanding. "Ms. Chen," Claire's voice came through her laptop. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting about the prototype delay. They're concerned about your extended stay in Cedar Grove." Sarah minimized the video call window, looking instead at the proposal she'd been drafting. "Tell them I'm pursuing a new development avenue, something that could revolutionize our approach to user comfort." "They'll want specifics," Claire warned, her loyalty warring with practical concern. "And the PR team is fielding calls about your absence. There are rumors." "Let them rumor," Sarah interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. "Sometimes the best innovations come from unexpected directions." She paused, considering her next words. "Carefully. Claire, I need you to do something else for me. Find out everything you can about Catherine Turner's accident, medical records, police reports, anything that might help me understand." She trailed off, not quite sure what she was trying to understand. Why Mike looked at broken things with such empathy. Why his daughter drew pictures for strangers. Why she, Sarah Chen, CEO of a billion-dollar company, couldn't stop thinking about a small-town repair shop. The dossier included Mike's business records, modest but stable income, perfect credit despite tight margins, a small life insurance payout that had helped him keep the shop after Catherine's death. By any practical measure, he was worlds away from Sarah's corporate empire, yet something about his approach to her prosthetic had sparked an idea she couldn't shake. She pulled up the schematics for version 37.2, comparing them to her notes from the park. Mike had diagnosed and fixed her existing prosthetic in minutes, with nothing but basic tools and intuitive understanding. What if that same human touch could be integrated into their cutting-edge design? What if technology could learn from tradition? The sun was setting over Cedar Grove's main street, visible from her hotel window. In the fading light, she could see Turner's timepieces and repairs. Its simple storefront, a stark contrast to Chen Robotics' gleaming headquarters. Tomorrow, she decided, she would visit, not as a CEO or an innovator, but as someone with something that needed fixing. Her fingers traced the edge of the dossier, lingering on a photo of Mike and Emily at last year's town festival. They were at the repair booth Mike set up annually, teaching children how to fix their own toys. The caption read, "Turner continues family tradition of mechanical mentorship." Sarah closed the file, her decision crystallizing. In the morning, she would walk into his shop with a deliberately malfunctioning watch, a vintage piece she'd acquired years ago but never worn. It would give her a chance to observe him work, to understand his process more fully. At least, that's what she would tell the board if they asked. The truth, which she was only beginning to admit to herself, was both simpler and more complicated. She wanted to see him again, to experience that rare combination of competence and compassion that had nothing to do with market strategies or corporate innovations. Claire's voice came through again. "Ms. Chen, about that emergency meeting. Schedule it for next week," Sarah said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Some things can't be rushed." The private jet's arrival at Cedar Grove's small regional airport caused the kind of stir the town hadn't seen since the governor's campaign stop 3 years ago. Rose Miller, who'd been manning the airport's single coffee kiosk for 22 years, nearly dropped her pot when the sleek aircraft touched down, its Chen Robotics logo gleaming in the morning sun. "Did you see who it is?" she whispered into her phone, calling her sister at the diner. "Sarah Chen herself, the billionaire from the news, the one who makes those fancy artificial limbs." By the time Sarah stepped onto the tarmac, the town's gossip network was already humming. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, elegant but understated, a charcoal pantsuit that spoke of business rather than philanthropy. The vintage watch in her purse felt like a talisman, its slight mechanical flaw her perfect excuse. Her driver, a local hire, couldn't quite hide his curiosity. "Welcome to Cedar Grove, Ms. Chen, though begging your pardon, but word is you've already visited?" Sarah smiled, watching the familiar streets pass by. "Briefly," she said, her hand unconsciously touching her prosthetic. "I encountered some unexpected expertise here." The driver nodded knowingly. "Must be talking about Mike Turner. Man's got magic in his hands, my mother always says. Fixed her mother's old music box last spring. Thing hadn't played in 30 years. They passed the park where she'd met Mike, now quiet in the early morning hours. The playground stood empty, waiting for the after-school rush that would bring Emily and her boundless energy. Sarah found herself wondering if Mike packed his daughter's lunch every morning, if he included little notes or surprises like her own father once had. "Here we are," the driver announced, pulling up to Turner's timepieces and repairs. "Though, you might want to wait a bit. Mike doesn't usually open until—" He stopped mid-sentence, noticing Mike already at his workbench through the window. The early morning light caught the tools laid out with precise care, ready for another day of mending broken things. Sarah gathered her courage, an unfamiliar sensation for someone who regularly faced boardrooms and international media. "Thank you," she told the driver. "I can take it from here." The bell above the shop door chimed softly as she entered. Mike looked up from his work, and for a moment their eyes met in the quiet morning light. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else. Surprise, certainly, but also a warmth that made Sarah's carefully prepared speech catch in her throat. "Your leg giving you trouble again?" he asked, his voice carrying that same gentle competence she remembered. "Actually," she reached for the watch in her purse, "I have something else that needs your expertise." Before she could continue, the shop's door chimed again. Emily burst in, backpack bouncing, followed by an apologetic-looking older woman. "Daddy, Mrs. Martinez said I could show you my art grade before—" Emily stopped short, her eyes widening, as she recognized Sarah. "You came back, Daddy, I told you she would." "Wait here, I have something—" She dropped her backpack, rummaging through it with determined focus until she emerged triumphant with a slightly crumpled drawing. "I made this for you. See? That's you, and that's your special leg that Daddy fixed." Sarah knelt down, taking the drawing with the gravity it deserved. "It's beautiful, Emily. You captured me perfectly." She looked up at Mike, who was watching the scene with an expression that made her heart skip. "You have quite the artist here." Mrs. Martinez, who had been standing quietly by the door, cleared her throat. "Emily, we should let your father work. You'll be late for school." "But Mrs. Martinez," Emily protested, "she just got here, and I wanted to show her my rock collection and tell her about the science fair and—" "Emily," Mike's voice was gentle but firm. "Remember what we said about responsibility?" The girl's shoulders slumped slightly, but she rallied quickly. "Will you be here after school?" she asked Sarah, hope bright in her eyes. Sarah glanced at Mike, then back to Emily. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to your father about a business proposition. Perhaps, if he's agreeable, we could all have dinner together." The words surprised her even as she said them. It wasn't the carefully orchestrated business approach she'd planned. But watching Emily's face light up, seeing the subtle shift in Mike's expression, she knew it was right. "Pizza at Romano's?" Emily suggested hopefully. "They have the best garlic knots in the whole world." Mike ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah was beginning to recognize as his way of processing unexpected situations. "That's very kind, but Ms. Chen probably has more important—" "Sarah," she interrupted. "Please, call me Sarah, and I can't think of anything more important than garlic knots that come highly recommended." The Corner Cup Cafe sat halfway between Mike's shop and Emily's school, a local institution where coffee came in ceramic mugs that had survived decades of daily use. Sarah traced the rim of her cup, noting the slight chip that somehow made it more charming, so different from the pristine espresso cups in her San Francisco office. I have to admit, Mike said, adding a second packet of sugar to his coffee, I'm still trying to understand why the CEO of Chen Robotics wants to talk to a small-town repair shop owner. The morning sun filtered through the cafe's front window, catching the dust motes in its beam. Sarah watched them dance, gathering her thoughts. She'd rehearsed this conversation countless times, had prepared spreadsheets and proposals. Instead, she found herself saying, "Tell me about your father's toolbox." Mike's surprise showed in the slight pause before he lifted his cup. "That's not what I expected you to ask. I've read all the business profiles, the technical specifications, the market analysis," Sarah said, her voice softening. "But yesterday, you fixed my prosthetic in 5 minutes with tools from a box that looks older than both of us combined. That's what I want to understand." A small smile tugged at Mike's lips as he set down his coffee. "Dad always said tools were just extensions of caring. He'd tell me, 'Mickey, anyone can learn the mechanics, but understanding why something wants to work, that's the real skill.'" "Wants to work?" Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. "Everything's trying to do what it's meant to do," Mike explained, his hands moving slightly as they did when he worked. "A watch wants to keep time. A music box wants to play its song. Even the most sophisticated prosthetic," he gestured to her leg, "wants to move naturally. Sometimes they just need a little help remembering how." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of truth she hadn't known she was seeking. "That's exactly what we're missing," she said, more to herself than to Mike. "We've been so focused on advancing the technology, we've forgotten to listen to what it wants to do." The waitress appeared with fresh coffee, and Sarah noticed how she topped off Mike's cup with familiar ease. "Your usual breakfast, Mike? Emily said you skipped it this morning." "Thanks, Annie, but I'm fine. He'll have the wheat toast and eggs," Sarah found herself saying. When both Mike and the waitress looked at her, she added, "Emily mentioned at the shop that you always skip breakfast when you're worried about something. And given that I showed up unannounced," Mike's laugh surprised them both, warm and genuine, breaking through the last of the formality between them. "Busted by my own daughter's observation skills," he nodded to Annie. "She's right, the usual." "Please." After Annie left, a comfortable silence settled between them. Through the window, they could see Cedar Grove waking up, shopkeepers sweeping sidewalks, early morning joggers passing by, the ritual of small-town life unfolding. "Your company," Mike said finally, "it's doing incredible work. I've read about your prosthetics, seen the videos. You're changing lives." "We are," Sarah agreed, then hesitated. "But yesterday when you fixed my leg, it was the first time in years I forgot I was wearing a prosthetic. Do you understand how remarkable that is?" Mike's eyes met hers, serious. "Now, I just did what needed doing." "Exactly." Sarah reached into her briefcase, pulling out not the corporate proposal she'd prepared, but Emily's drawing. She smoothed it carefully on the table between them. "Look how she drew me, not as someone with a prosthetic, but just as me." "Emily has a gift for seeing people as they are," Mike said softly, and Sarah heard the undertone of loss in his voice. "Like her mother?" she asked gently. Mike's fingers tightened slightly around his cup. "Catherine was an art teacher. She could find beauty in broken things, see potential where others saw damage. Emily's a lot like her that way." Sarah wanted to ask more, but Annie returned with Mike's breakfast and a plate of toast she hadn't ordered. "On the house, honey," Annie said with a wink. "We take care of our own here in Cedar Grove." The simple kindness, the assumption that she was somehow already part of this world, made Sarah's throat tight. In her corporate life, every interaction was calculated, every kindness measured against potential return. "So," Mike said, breaking a piece of toast in half and offering it to her with natural grace, "tell me about this business proposition of yours. The real one, not the corporate version you prepared." Sarah accepted the toast, understanding that more than breakfast was being shared. "Actually," she said, "I think I'm developing a new one. How would you feel about teaching me to fix my own prosthetic?" The magazine layout on Mike's workbench seemed to mock him with its glossy perfection. Tech Titan's Small Town Romance screamed the headline, accompanied by a paparazzi photo of him and Sarah leaving Romano's Pizza the night before. Emily's excited face was mercifully blurred, but the damage was done. "I count 6 different mistakes in the first paragraph alone," Rose from the airport coffee kiosk announced, peering over his shoulder. "They called you a rustic craftsman." "Rustic? And they didn't even mention how you fixed Mrs. Henderson's grandfather clock last month. Now that was craftsmanship." Mike closed the magazine with a quiet sigh. "Rose, don't you have coffee to serve?" "Slow morning," she shrugged, then lowered her voice. Channel 7 news van just pulled up outside the diner. Annie's already chased them off twice. The bell above. The shop door chimed before Mike could respond. Sarah stood in the doorway, looking somehow both perfectly composed and slightly apologetic. She held up her phone, displaying yet another article. Chen Robotics Stock Surges Amid CEO's Mystery and Romance. "I'm so sorry about this," she said, closing the door firmly behind her. "My PR team is working to—" "Sarah," Mike interrupted gently, "you don't need to manage this like a corporate crisis." Rose took the hint, gathering her coffee cup. "I should get back to the airport. Those pilots won't caffeinate themselves." At the door, she paused. "And Sarah? Any friend of Mike's is a friend of Cedar Grove. Those vultures with cameras won't get a word out of us." After Rose left, Sarah sank into the chair by Mike's workbench, her usual poise wavering. "Everything I do becomes a headline. I should have anticipated this, should have had a strategy in place to protect you and Emily from—" The sudden warmth of Mike's hand covering hers stopped her mid-sentence. "Emily's school has already dealt with media attention after Catherine's accident. They know how to handle it. And me?" He smiled, gesturing to his workbench. "I've got broken things that need fixing. That's all that matters." Sarah looked down at their hands, still joined on the workbench's worn surface. "The board called an emergency meeting this morning. Our stock is up 15%, just on speculation about potential synergy between Chen Robotics and traditional craftsmanship. They want to launch a whole marketing campaign around it." "And what do you want?" The question, asked with such simple directness, made Sarah pause. Through the window she could see photographers gathering across the street, their long lenses aimed at the shop. Her phone buzzed continuously, with messages from Claire about damage control and media strategies. "I want—" she began, then stopped, surprising herself with the force of her next words. "I want them to leave us alone. I want to learn how you knew exactly what my prosthetic needed. I want to have pizza with you and Emily without it becoming a corporate event." Mike's hand tightened slightly on hers. "Then that's what we'll do. It's not that simple." "Why not?" Before Sarah could. "Enter," Emily burst through the door, Mrs. Martinez following with an apologetic expression. "Daddy! Sarah, I'm famous!" Emily waved a tablet, her face glowing. "Jasmine saw my picture in the news. Well, my back, but she knew it was me because of my butterfly backpack." Mike shot a concerned look at Mrs. Martinez, who quickly explained, "We kept her inside during recess. The reporters haven't gotten past the school security, but it's so exciting," Emily continued, bouncing on her toes. "Can we have pizza again tonight? The newspaper people really liked Romano's. They said it was quaint and charming and—" "Emily!" Mike started, but Sarah was already moving, kneeling down to Emily's level despite her prosthetic's protest. "Hey," she said softly, "how about instead of pizza, you help me with something important? Your dad's teaching me about fixing things, and I could really use another expert's opinion." Emily's eyes widened. "Like when we fix my toys." "Exactly like that. But first," Sarah looked up at Mike, a plan forming. "How would you both feel about getting out of town for a few days? I know a place where we could work on projects together without any interruptions." "You mean like a vacation?" Emily asked, wonder creeping into her voice. Mike started to protest, but Sarah pressed on. "I have a cabin in the mountains. Very private, excellent workshop space and—" She smiled at Emily. A treehouse with a perfect view for drawing. Through the window, they could see the media circus growing. But in the shop's quiet space, surrounded by the steady tick of countless timepieces, something else was growing too. Something that had nothing to do with stock prices or headlines. "What do you say?" Sarah asked, looking between father and daughter. "Want to escape with me?" Emily's enthusiastic "yes" came just as Mike's quiet laugh filled the air. "Well," he said, reaching for his father's toolbox, "I suppose some projects do require a change of scenery." The mountain cabin's workshop was nothing like Mike had imagined. Instead of corporate minimalism, the space breathed with well-worn comfort. Tools arranged on pegboards, work tables scarred with use, and windows that welcomed the afternoon light. Sarah stood in the doorway watching as he took it all in. "This was my father's space," she said quietly. "After my accident, he spent 3 years here, learning everything he could about prosthetics. Said if his daughter was going to walk again, he wanted to understand every spring and joint that made it possible." Mike ran his hand along a workbench, recognizing the marks of careful, patient work. "Is this where Chen Robotics began?" Sarah moved to a cabinet, pulling out an old wooden box. "In a way, though back then, it was just a father trying to help his daughter." She opened the box, revealing a broken watch, a man's timepiece, its face cracked, but its gold case still gleaming. "This was his. It stopped the day of my accident. I've never had the heart to have it fixed." Mike accepted the watch with the reverence it deserved, turning it carefully in his hands. "May I?" Through the workshop's open door, they could hear Emily's delighted squeals as she explored the treehouse, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. Sarah found herself smiling at the sound. "That's why I really bought this place, you know. After Father died, I couldn't bear to sell it. Up here, I'm not the CEO of Chen Robotics. I'm just the girl whose father taught her to walk again." Mike had opened the watch's case, his experienced eyes taking in the mechanism. "Your father did more than teach you to walk. He taught you to rebuild yourself." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "That's what you're doing with your company, isn't you? Helping others rebuild." Sarah moved closer, watching as his hands worked. With gentle precision, the board thinks it's about innovation, about market share. They don't understand that every prosthetic we design is really about giving someone back their story. "Like Catherine's watch," Mike said softly, almost to himself. "Tell me about her?" Sarah asked, matching his quiet tone. "Only if you want to." Mike's hands stayed steady on the watch, but his voice carried years of careful grief. "She was an art teacher. Saw the world in colors I never knew existed. She's the one who taught me that fixing things isn't just about mechanics. It's about preserving memories, keeping stories alive." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a worn photograph. Catherine smiled from the image, seated at a potter's wheel, her hands shaped around clay. She used to say every broken piece had a history worth saving. The day He paused, gathering himself. Her watch stopped at 3:47 p.m. "Same as your father's, just a different kind of accident." Sarah's hand found his shoulder, her touch. "Grounding. And you've kept it all this time, waiting to fix it." Emily asks about it sometimes, but fixing it means accepting it's really over, you know. As long as it's broken, it's like holding on to a piece of her story. From outside, Emily's voice called out, "Daddy, Sarah, the treehouse has a real telescope." Sarah squeezed Mike's shoulder gently before moving to the door. "Come on, I think it's time I showed you both something." They followed Emily's excitement to the treehouse, a structure that proved to be more observatory than playhouse. As the afternoon light faded, Sarah adjusted the telescope, showing Emily how to focus on the emerging stars. "My father built this after my recovery," Sarah explained. "Said that looking at stars helped him remember how small our problems really were." She smiled at Emily's wonder. "He also said that broken things sometimes lead us to beautiful discoveries." Mike watched as Sarah helped Emily locate constellations, their heads bent together over star charts. His fingers traced the edges of the 2 broken watches in his pocket, Catherine's and Sarah's father's. Perhaps some stories didn't need to end with their breaking. "Sarah," he said, drawing both their attention, "would you like to learn how to fix your father's watch?" Her eyes met his, understanding the weight of what he was really asking. "Only if you'll let me help you with Catherine's." Emily looked between them, picking up on the moment's importance even if she didn't fully understand it. "Can I help too? Mrs. Martinez says fixing things together makes them extra special." Mike pulled his daughter close, making room as Sarah joined them. Through the telescope's lens, the stars seemed close enough to touch, each one a light in the darkness. A story, waiting to be told. "Yes," he said, holding both watches in his hands. "I think it's time we fixed them together." The merger documents arrived by courier at dawn, their urgent red stamps stark against the morning mist. Sarah stood on the cabin's porch, phone pressed to her ear, trying to keep her voice down as the sun painted the mountains in shades of promise she couldn't quite trust. "What do you mean, hostile takeover?" She listened, her free hand gripping the porch railing. "Meridian Medical can't just—" She stopped, seeing Emily through the window, setting the breakfast table with exaggerated care, 3 places, each, with a pine cone centerpiece she'd collected yesterday. "Claire, I need you to stall them. The prototype isn't ready, and if Meridian gets control—" She paused again as Mike appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His eyes caught hers, concern shadowing his face as he registered her tension. "Give me an hour," she finished, ending the call. Mike offered her a mug, and she accepted it gratefully, letting its warmth seep into her fingers. "That didn't sound like good news," he said quietly. Sarah took a sip of coffee, buying time to find the right words. "Meridian Medical is trying to force a merger. They've been watching our stock, waiting for a moment of vulnerability." She laughed without humor. "Apparently my small-town romance created exactly the opening they needed. The board is panicking. What happens if they succeed? They'll strip Chen Robotics for parts, our research, our patents." She stopped, her voice catching. "The prototype we've been developing? They'll turn it into a luxury item. Price it. Out of reach for the people who need it most." Through the window they could see Emily carefully arranging strips of bacon into smile shapes on each plate. Mike touched Sarah's arm gently. "What do you need?" The simple question, free of judgment or demand, made her throat tight. "I need to go back, face this head-on, but—" She looked through the window again at the domestic scene she'd somehow become part of. "I don't want to leave, not like this. Not when we're just starting to—" "Fix things?" Mike finished, his smile gentle. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. On her wrist, she wore her father's watch, still broken, but now wrapped in the promise of repair rather than the weight of memory. Yesterday, she and Mike had begun the delicate process of dismantling it, Emily watching wide-eyed as they explained each tiny gear and spring. "Sarah," Emily's voice carried through the screen door, "I made the bacon smile because Daddy said, you have important business stuff today, and sometimes you need extra smiles for that." Mike's hand found the small of Sarah's back, steady and grounding. "You know, my dad used to say that running away from a problem breaks more than it fixes." Sarah leaned into his touch, just slightly. "Your father sounds like he was a very wise man. He also said that the best repairs happen when you have the right tools and the right people helping." He turned her gently to face him. "So maybe the question isn't whether you should go, but whether you should go alone." "Mike, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He glanced through the window at Emily. "Besides, I think someone would never forgive us if we didn't let her see where you work your own kind of fixing magic." The screen door creaked open and Emily bounded out. "The bacon's getting cold, and I used the fancy napkins I found, the ones with little robots on them." Sarah looked down at the merger documents, then at Emily's hopeful face, then at Mike's steady presence beside her. In her pocket, her phone buzzed again, probably Claire with more crisis updates. But for the first time in her corporate life, Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of what needed fixing. "Emily," she said, kneeling down despite her prosthetic's morning stiffness, how would you like to see where I work? It's not as cozy as your dad's shop, but we have some pretty amazing robots. Emily's eyes widened. Really? Can we go now? Do you have robots that do backflips? Tommy said robots can do backflips now, but I told him that's probably just in movies. But maybe... First, Mike interrupted, fighting a smile. Breakfast, then we pack. Then he looked at Sarah, his eyes holding a promise. We face whatever needs facing. Together. Sarah stood, her decision crystallizing. Claire, she spoke. Into her phone. Prepare the corporate apartment for 3. And call the board. I'm bringing in a consulting expert on user-centered design. She winked at Emily. And maybe an artistic advisor too. The morning sun broke fully over the mountains, turning the merger document's urgent red stamps into something less threatening. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the best way to fix a crisis was to change the tools you used to face it. The petition started at Annie's diner, scrawled on the back of a placemat after a particularly aggressive reporter made Emily cry. By sunset, it had gathered 300 signatures, practically every adult in Cedar Grove. Protect our own, the headline read, followed by a simple demand. Respect the privacy of the Turner family and their friends. Rose from the airport coffee kiosk had laminated copies and posted them everywhere, including directly on the windshield, of a Gossip magazine's photography van. But it was Mrs. Martinez who truly mobilized the town's defense, coordinating what she called Operation Hometown Heart through her extensive network of parent volunteers. It's quite remarkable, Sarah said, reading the latest local paper in Mike's shop. The Cedar Grove Gazette had run a front-page editorial titled Why We Stand with Mike Turner, followed by a collection of stories about watches fixed, heirlooms restored, and kindnesses quietly given over the years. Cedar Grove takes care of its own, Mike replied, carefully adjusting the mechanism in Sarah's father's watch. And apparently, that includes billionaire CEOs now. Sarah set down the paper, moving to watch him work. Over the past week, as they'd split their time between San Francisco and Cedar Grove, she'd noticed how the town had subtly shifted its perception of her. She wasn't just the CEO anymore. She was the woman who helped Emily with her science project, who learned to make proper garlic knots at Romano's, who sat for hours in Mike's shop learning the patience of proper repair. The board was impressed. You know, she said, watching his skilled hands navigate the watch's delicate interior. Your presentation on incorporating traditional craftsmanship into our design process, Marcus actually smiled. High praise indeed. Mike chuckled, then grew serious. How are the merger negotiations going? Before Sarah could answer, the shop's door burst open. Emily ran in, followed by what seemed like half her class, all clutching handmade signs. Leave Emily's family alone, and Cedar Grove protects its own. Mrs. Martinez appeared behind them, slightly out of breath. I'm so sorry. They were supposed to wait until the official town meeting, but someone, she gave Emily a pointed look, was too excited. We're your protection squad, Emily announced proudly. Like a shield made of people who care. Mike set down his tools, emotion flickering across his face. That's very kind, everyone, but you don't need to. Actually, Sarah interrupted, an idea forming. They might be exactly what we need. She knelt down to Emily's level, Prosthetic moving smoothly thanks to Mike's latest adjustments. Would you and your friends like to help us with something important? The children gathered closer, eyes wide with excitement. Sarah continued, Chen Robotics is having a special event next week. We're announcing some new ideas about how to make our prosthetics better. Would you like to show everyone how Cedar Grove helps fix things? Like Daddy does, Emily asked. Exactly like that, but bigger. Sarah looked up at Mike, sharing her vision. What if we showed the world that the best innovation comes from community, from people helping people? Mrs. Martinez was already nodding, her teacher's mind catching the possibilities. The children could demonstrate their science projects. Emily's not the only one you've helped with repairs, Mike. And Sarah, didn't you mention wanting to start a youth engineering program? The idea spread through the shop like ripples in still water. Parents who'd followed their children began offering suggestions. Mr. Romano volunteered his restaurant for planning meetings. Rose promised to coordinate with local media. The right kind, she emphasized, not those vultures from the city. Mike watched it all unfold, his expression softening as he realized what was happening. His small shop, his quiet life of fixing. Broken things had somehow become the heart of something larger, something that might help fix a bigger kind of broken. "Sarah," he said quietly, drawing her aside as the impromptu planning session continued around them. "Are you sure about this? Mixing business with all of this?" He gestured to the enthusiastic crowd in his shop. Sarah took his hand, feeling the calluses earned from years of careful repair work. "Do you know what I realized, watching you work this past week? Every time you fix something, you're not just repairing an object, you're restoring someone's connection to their story." She squeezed his hand. "Maybe that's what Chen Robotics has been missing. Maybe that's what I've been missing." Through the window, they could see more townspeople arriving, drawn by the energy emanating from the small shop. The petition that had started on a placemat had grown into something more, a community's declaration that some things were worth protecting, worth fixing, worth fighting for. "Well," Mike said, a smile tugging at his lips, "I suppose some repairs do require a whole community." Emily appeared between them, taking both their hands. "Can we show them the watch we're fixing together? Please, it's like show and tell, but for grown-ups." Sarah laughed, feeling the last of her corporate armor soften. "Yes, sweetheart, it's exactly like that." The old family photo had lived in the bottom drawer of Mike's workbench for 3 years, tucked beneath Catherine's watch and a stack of Emily's early drawings. He hadn't planned to share it today, but something about the quiet afternoon, with Sarah beside him, learning the intricacies of watch repair, made it feel right. "This was the day we opened the shop," he said, carefully placing the photograph between them on the workbench. Catherine smiled from the image, one arm around Mike, the other holding a toddling Emily. Behind them, the Turner's timepieces and repairs sign gleamed with fresh paint. Sarah studied the image, her fingers hovering just above its surface. She looked so proud. She was, not of me exactly, but of what the shop represented. Mike's hands stayed busy with the delicate gears of her father's watch, as if the familiar work made the memories easier to share. Catherine always said every town needs a place where broken things can be made whole again. The autumn light filtered through the shop windows, casting long shadows across the workbench. From the back room, they could hear Emily humming as she worked on her homework, occasionally asking Claire, who had surprisingly volunteered to help with math, for guidance. "Tell me about the accident," Sarah said softly, her hand finding his wrist, stilling his nervous movement with the tools. Mike set down the tiny screwdriver, drawing a deep breath. It was raining. She was driving back from an art supply store in Milton. They were having a sale on ceramic supplies. She'd called to say she'd found these amazing glazes she wanted to try with her students. He paused, gathering strength. The other driver was texting, didn't see the red light. Sarah's hand tightened on his wrist. The watch stopped. 3:47 p.m. I was working on old Mr. Peterson's grandfather clock when the police came. Emily was napping in her playpen right there. He nodded toward the corner of the shop. I remember thinking, as they were telling me, that I needed to fix the clock before he came to pick it up. "The mind finds strange anchors in moments of shock," Sarah said. "When I lost my leg, I remember being worried about missing a math test." Mike looked up, meeting her eyes. "You've never talked about your accident." Sarah's free hand drifted to her prosthetic, a gesture so habitual she usually didn't notice it. "I was 12. My father and I were hiking. He loved showing me the mechanics of nature, how everything fitted together in perfect systems. There was a rock slide." She smiled sadly. "He blamed himself for not predicting it, for not protecting me. That's why. He built this." She tapped her prosthetic leg. "The first prototype. He learned engineering, mechanics, anything that might help. The cabin workshop became his obsession. Every tool, every book, every failed attempt at making something that would let his daughter run again. And that became Chen Robotics. Yes, but Sarah hesitated, then reached into her bag, pulling out a worn notebook. This was his. I've never shown it to anyone else. She opened it carefully, revealing pages of detailed drawings, calculations, and notes. Look at the margins. Mike leaned closer, reading the handwritten notes. For Sarah's first steps. Must be lighter. She loves to dance. Make it strong enough for climbing. My girl needs to reach the stars. He wasn't building a prosthetic, Mike said softly. He was rebuilding your childhood. Just like you do for Emily, Sarah replied. Every repair, every patient explanation, every moment spent teaching her how things work. You're preserving Catherine's legacy of finding beauty in broken things. From the back room, Emily's voice carried clearly, Claire, did you know my dad can fix anything? And Sarah makes robot legs that help people dance again. When they fix things together, it's like magic. Mike and Sarah shared a look, something shifting in the space between them. Carefully, Mike picked up Catherine's watch, which had sat untouched. On his workbench for 3 years. Maybe it's time to fix this one too. Sarah reached for her father's notebook, turning to a blank page. Together? She asked, picking up a pencil. We could start by mapping out both watches, seeing how they connect. Like a family tree of broken things. Mike smiled, the expression reaching his eyes for the first time when talking about Catherine's watch. Exactly, and Emily can help. Document the process. Combine her mother's art with her father's mechanics. As if summoned by her name, Emily appeared in the doorway. Are you finally going to fix Mom's watch? She asked, hope and hesitation mingling in her voice. Mike held out his hand, and Emily came to stand between them. Yes, sweetheart. I think it's time we all helped each other's broken pieces work again. Sarah opened the notebook wider, making room for all 3 of them at the workbench. Outside, Cedar Grove continued its quiet afternoon rhythm, while inside the shop, 3 people bent over 2 broken watches, beginning the delicate work of healing not just mechanisms, but memories. The newspaper headlines screamed across Mike's workbench in bold black letters, Chen Robotics accused of prototype manipulation. Below it, in smaller text, sources claim CEO distracted by small-town romance as company faces crisis. Sarah stood at the window of the shop, her phone buzzing endlessly in her hand. Behind her, Mike could hear Emily in the back room, blissfully unaware as she worked on her science project. A presentation about how watches tell time, featuring both her mother's and Sarah's father's timepieces as examples. Meridian Medical, Sarah said quietly, her voice tight with controlled anger. They leaked fabricated test results, claiming we've been manipulating data on the new prosthetic line. She turned to face Mike, her composure cracking slightly. They're saying I've been too emotionally compromised to notice problems in the development process. Mike set down the precision screwdriver he'd been holding, the tiny instrument suddenly feeling inadequate against the magnitude of what they were facing. What do you need? I need... Sarah's voice caught as her phone buzzed again. The caller ID showed Claire's increasingly desperate attempts to reach her. I need time to think, to prove the results are fake, to protect everything. My father built... The shop's door chimed and Rose burst in, clutching more newspapers. They're saying terrible things, Sarah, but we've got your back. Half the town's already called those papers to tell them what we think of their lies. Mike moved to Sarah's side, his hand finding the small of her back, the gesture now as natural as breathing. Show me the test results, he said quietly. Real engineering leaves traces, just like real repairs. If they fabricated the data, we'll find the seams. Sarah looked at him, hope flickering through her worry. You think you could spot inconsistencies? I've spent 30 years learning how things are supposed to work together. Numbers have their own kind of rhythm, their own way of telling the truth. He smiled slightly. Besides, I have a secret weapon. As if on cue, Emily's voice carried from the back room. "Daddy, Sarah, come see what I found in Grandpa's notebook." They found Emily surrounded by papers, printouts of Sarah's company's test results, mixed with pages from her father's old notebook, which Sarah had been using to document their watch repair progress. The girl pointed excitedly at a series of calculations. "Look, the numbers dance the same way." She held up 2 pages side by side. "See, when Grandpa was designing Sarah's first leg, he made patterns with the numbers. And these new papers have different patterns. They don't dance right." Sarah leaned over, her technical expertise suddenly realigning with Emily's innocent observation. "She's right," she breathed, reaching for the papers. "The variance patterns in the fabricated results, they don't match the natural distribution we always see in real prosthetic testing. It's too perfect, too structured." Mike watched as Sarah's CEO persona merged seamlessly with the woman who'd spent hours teaching his daughter about gears and springs. She was already pulling out her tablet, fingers flying over the screen. "Claire, get Marcus and the engineering team. Emily just found our smoking gun." She smiled at the girl. "How would you like to help us show some corporate bullies what real innovation looks like?" Emily bounced in her chair. "Can I bring the watches to show how fixing old things helps make new things better?" "Actually," Sarah said, a plan forming, "that's exactly what we need." She turned to Mike. "Remember what you said about understanding why something wants to work? What if we showed the world that the best innovation comes from listening to both, the mechanics and the heart?" Mike picked up Catherine's watch from the workbench. "A live demonstration. Fixing these watches while explaining how traditional craftsmanship influences modern design." "Better," Sarah smiled, real warmth breaking through her professional concern. "A live demonstration of how a small-town repair shop helped Chen Robotics revolutionize prosthetic design." Emily's right. The numbers tell a story, just like every repair does. The shop's door chimed again as more townspeople arrived, drawn by the news and their protective instincts toward both Turner's and their newfound friend. Mrs. Martinez came bearing fresh coffee and determination. Romano brought stress-fighting garlic knots. Even old Mr. Peterson arrived, carrying the grandfather clock that Mike had been fixing the day Catherine died. "Time to face the music," the old man said, setting down the clock. "But this time, you've got a whole orchestra behind you." Sarah looked around the small shop, at the community that had somehow become her own, at the man who fixed broken things with love, and at the little girl who saw patterns that others missed. Her phone buzzed again, probably more crisis calls, but for the first time since the scandal broke, she felt steady. "Well," she said, picking up her father's watch, "shall we show them how Cedar Grove fixes things?" The repaired prosthetic gleamed under the conference room lights, its surface bearing the unmistakable marks of both precision engineering and artisanal craftsmanship. Sarah stood before the board of directors, Mike and Emily flanking her like anchors in a storm. Behind them, displayed on the massive screen, was a split image, the original prosthetic design next to Mike's modified version. "What you're looking at," Sarah began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence Mike had come to know in his shop, "is the future of Chen Robotics. Not just innovation, but innovation with heart." The boardroom, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking San Francisco, couldn't have been further from Turner's timepieces and repairs, yet somehow Mike's presence made it feel like home. He stepped forward, handling the prosthetic with the same care he showed the most delicate watches. "The problem wasn't in the technology," he explained, his shop owner's voice surprisingly at ease in this corporate setting. "It was in the approach. You were building perfect machines. But people aren't machines, they're stories waiting to be continued." Emily, dressed in her best school clothes and practically vibrating with excitement, pointed to the display. "See how Daddy added these tiny adjusters? They're like the ones in old watches. They help the leg remember how to dance." A ripple of surprised laughter broke the boardroom's tension. Marcus, Sarah's head of R&D, leaned forward with newfound interest. The user comfort ratings with these modifications are unprecedented. How did you know where to make the adjustments? Mike smiled, reaching into his toolbox, the same one that had been his father's. Every repair teaches you something about what broke and why. But more importantly, it teaches you about what the piece wants to be. He held up Catherine's watch, now ticking perfectly for the first time in 3 years. Sometimes, healing something broken shows you how to make something new even stronger. Sarah touched her prosthetic, the one Mike had adjusted in the park that first day. When Mike fixed my leg, he didn't just adjust the mechanics, he restored my connection to it. That's what we've been missing in our design philosophy. She pulled. Up the next slide, photos of their testing program in Cedar Grove, community members with prosthetics working with Mike to fine-tune their devices. Children like Emily learning basic engineering principles while helping with adjustments. A whole town becoming part of the innovation process. Meridian Medical tried to destroy us by claiming we'd lost our way. Sarah continued, her voice strengthening. They were right about one thing. We had lost something. We'd forgotten that every prosthetic we make isn't just a piece of technology. It's a chapter in someone's story. The board members stirred, exchanging glances. The chairman spoke first. And the leaked test results? Emily proudly held up her science project folder. The numbers didn't dance right. Real legs need to move like real stories, with ups and downs and little pauses in between. The fake numbers were too smooth, like a robot trying to pretend it's human. Sarah couldn't help but smile at the girl's simple wisdom. Our engineering team confirmed it. The leaked data showed statistically impossible consistency. Real human movement, even with the most advanced prosthetics, maintains certain natural variations. Variations that Mike's modifications actually work with rather than against. She walked to the window, looking out over the city. My father founded this company because he wanted his daughter to walk again. Mike fixes watches because every broken timepiece carries someone's memories. Emily sees patterns in numbers because she understands that everything that matters has a heart. Turning back to the board, Sarah's vision was clear. I'm proposing a new division within Chen Robotics, the Turner Institute for Adaptive Engineering. A bridge between cutting-edge technology and traditional craftsmanship, between innovation and humanity. The chairman was already nodding, others following suit. Marcus was scribbling notes frantically, his eyes alight with possibilities. But Sarah wasn't watching them. She was watching Mike, who held both restored watches, his wife's and her father's, their synchronized ticking a quiet testimony to patience, love, and the art of healing broken things. Emily tugged at Sarah's sleeve, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. Does this mean we won? Can we have celebration pizza at Romano's? The boardroom dissolved into genuine laughter, the last of the tension breaking. The chairman stood, extending his hand first to Sarah, then to Mike. I think Ms. Chen and the Turners have shown us exactly what this company needs, though perhaps we should discuss the details over pizza. Sarah felt Mike's hand find hers, steady and sure as a perfectly balanced gear. In her other hand, she held her father's watch, its restored tick marking seconds in a future suddenly rich with possibility. Romano's it is, she said, squeezing Mike's hand. After all, some celebrations require a little small-town magic. The simple ring sat in Sarah's palm, its vintage silver band catching the late afternoon light that filtered through Turner's timepieces and repairs. No diamonds, no corporate flourishes, just a carefully restored piece that had caught her eye in an antique store window that morning. Like everything else that mattered in her life now, it felt right because it told a story. Are you sure about this? Claire asked, watching Sarah turn the ring over in her hands. The board expected the merger announcement today. Instead, you're planning to fix something that isn't broken. Sarah smiled, touching her prosthetic leg, the one Mike had adjusted so many months ago in the park. Sometimes the best repairs are the ones that make something work even better. The shop was quiet, closed early for what Emily had been told was a special family project. Through the window, Sarah could see Cedar Grove preparing for its autumn festival, streets lined with maple trees blazing orange and red, townspeople hanging lights between lampposts, Romano setting up his famous garlic knot stand. Mike and Emily would be back soon from their mysterious errand, a father-daughter mission that Sarah had orchestrated with Mrs. Martinez's help. The workbench was ready, laid out with tools and pieces of their shared story. Both restored watches, her father's notebook, Catherine's old sketchbook, and Emily's science project that had helped save Chen Robotics. The bell above the door chimed, softly, as Rose slipped in. They're on their way. Emily's bursting to show him her art installation at the school. She caught sight of the ring and gasped, "Oh, Sarah, it's perfect. Simple and true, just like love should be." Claire finished, surprising them both with the uncharacteristically romantic observation. The corporate assistant smiled at their startled looks. "What? I've learned a few things about authenticity since we came to Cedar Grove." Sarah placed the ring carefully beside the watches on the workbench. In the months since the crisis, as the Turner Institute had grown from idea to reality, she'd watched Mike teach young engineers the art of patient repair. She'd seen Emily bloom, combining her mother's artistic eye with her father's mechanical genius. And she'd felt herself change, learning that sometimes the strongest innovations come from the gentlest touches. The sound of familiar footsteps on the sidewalk made her heart skip. Rose and Claire quickly slipped into the back room, leaving Sarah alone with her carefully arranged workbench and the weight of all she wanted to say. The door opened, bringing the sound of Emily's excited chatter, and Mrs. Martinez said, "My art piece about watches and time and family is going to be the centerpiece of the whole festival. Did you see how I used Mom's old paint colors with the gears that Sarah—" She stopped short, taking in the transformed shop. "Oh, it's happening now." Mike looked between his daughter and Sarah, confusion giving way to something softer as he noticed the careful arrangement on his workbench. "What's happening now?" Sarah took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Mike Turner, I have something broken that needs fixing." His eyebrows rose slightly, hands already moving instinctively toward his tools. "Oh, my life," she said simply. "It works perfectly well. All the gears mesh, all the springs have the right tension. But like you taught me, working well isn't the same as working right." She picked up her father's watch. "This keeps perfect time now because you showed me that fixing something isn't just about mechanics. It's about understanding its heart." Emily had grown unusually quiet, watching with wide eyes as Sarah set down the watch and picked up Catherine's. "This works too because you were brave enough to let me help heal its story." She placed it beside her father's, their synchronized ticking filling the shop with gentle music. "And this," she lifted the silver ring, "is neither broken nor perfect. Like me, like you, like the family we've somehow built between silicon chips and clock gears." She held it out, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "So I was wondering if you'd help me fix the last missing piece." Mike stood very still, his expression softening into something that made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. But before he could speak, Emily burst out, "Daddy, Sarah's proposing, like in reverse Cinderella, where the princess asks the normal person to marry her." The tension broke as they both laughed, and Mike closed the distance between them in 2 steps. "Normal?" he asked, gathering both Sarah and Emily into his arms. "When have we ever been normal? Is that a yes?" Sarah whispered against his shoulder. Mike pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Well, as I always say, some things are worth fixing," Emily finished, bouncing with excitement. "Can I be the one to tell Romano? He owes Mrs. Martinez $20 because she said Sarah would ask first." Sarah slipped the ring onto Mike's finger as autumn light painted the shop in shades of gold. 2 watches keeping time for their new beginning, and a little girl dancing between them, her joy as bright as the future they would build together. The house keys jingled in Sarah's hand as she stood on the porch of their new home, A Victorian craftsman on Cedar Grove's maple-lined Madison Street, its wraparound porch perfect for summer evenings, and its carriage house already transformed into a state-of-the-art workshop. Not quite her San Francisco penthouse, not quite Mike's cozy apartment above the shop, but somehow better than either. "Last box," Mike called out, carrying what appeared to be Emily's entire rock collection, though I'm still not sure why we needed to move them all at once. "Because," Emily explained, following with her arms full of technical drawings, "they're a set, like a family. You can't separate families." She paused, looking up at Sarah. "Just like us now, right?" Sarah felt the familiar warmth spread through her chest, the one that appeared whenever Emily said things like that. "Just like us," she confirmed, unlocking the door to their home. Their home. The phrase still felt wonderfully new. The interior was a careful blend of their lives. Mike's antique workbench beside Sarah's modern design station, Emily's art supplies sharing space with prototype prosthetics, family photos, old and new, creating a timeline of love and loss and recovery. Catherine's bright paintings hung alongside diagrams from Sarah's father's notebook, neither diminishing the other. "The Turner Institute called," Sarah mentioned, setting down her laptop bag. "The first batch of student applications is incredible. Kids who want to learn both traditional craftsmanship and cutting-edge engineering." She smiled at Mike. Several mentioned being inspired by a certain repair shop owner's viral video about the poetry of mechanical things. Mike groaned good-naturedly. "I still can't believe that speech got recorded. I was just trying to explain to those engineering students why watching a mechanism's rhythm matters as much as measuring its output." 2 million views, Emily announced proudly, already arranging her rocks on the built-in shelves. "And Mrs. Martinez uses it in science class now. She says it's important to remember that numbers have hearts too." The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows, another perfect blend, these restored by Mike and redesigned by Sarah to incorporate subtle patterns of gears and circuits. In the workshop out back, they could hear Claire and Marcus setting up the new testing equipment, their voices blending with the familiar sounds of Romano delivering welcome home garlic knots, and Rose organizing what she called the community. "Welcome brigade." Sarah moved to the mantel, where both watches held places of honor. "Sometimes I wonder what they'd think, your Catherine, my father, about all of this." Mike wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Catherine would have loved your father's notebooks, all those margin notes about making sure your prosthetic could dance. She'd have filled them with sketches of movement studies. And my father would have adored your toolbox," Sarah added, leaning back into him. "All those carefully chosen tools, each with its own story. He believed everything worth building started with understanding what came before." Emily appeared between them, as she often did in quiet moments. "I put Mum's paintbrushes next to Sarah's soldering tools," she announced, "because art and science are just different ways of making things. Beautiful." The doorbell rang, the beginning of Cedar Grove's traditional welcome wagon, no doubt. But before they answered it, Sarah turned in Mike's arms, taking in this moment, Emily's excited bounce, Mike's steady presence, the life they were building together. "The board thinks we should expand the institute," she said quietly. "Open branches in other small towns, find more craftsmen willing to teach alongside our engineers." She watched Mike's eyes light up with possibilities. "What do you think?" "I think," he said slowly, "that every town has broken things waiting to be fixed, and people who know how to fix them if we just listen." Emily tugged at their hands. "Can I help? I'm getting really good at seeing how things want to work together." The doorbell rang again, accompanied by Rose's voice. "I know you're in there. These casseroles aren't getting any warmer." Sarah laughed, moving toward the door. This was her life now. Corporate decisions made over homemade casseroles, engineering breakthroughs inspired by a child's observations, love built on the foundation of healing broken things. "You know," Mike said, following her with Emily between them, For someone who came to Cedar Grove to fix a prosthetic, you've done quite a bit of additional repair work. Sarah opened the door to their neighbors, their friends, their community. Well, as a very wise man once told me, everything's trying to do what it's meant to do. She squeezed his hand. Sometimes it just needs the right helping hands to remember how. Emily darted out to help Rose with the casseroles, calling back over her shoulder. And sometimes the best fixes are the ones you didn't even know you needed. Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought, watching her family, old and new, pieced together and made stronger for having been broken. Welcome the future, one careful repair at a time. 1 year later, the bench in Cedar Grove Park had a small brass plaque that read, "Where broken things begin to heal." Sarah ran her fingers over the engraved letters, remembering that autumn day when a malfunctioning prosthetic had led her to a different kind of repair. "Ready for the big reveal?" Mike asked, settling beside her with their well-worn toolbox, his father's, now bearing both their initials. In his other hand, he held a familiar device. The prototype. Sarah smiled, watching Emily set up her presentation. Board nearby. The quarterly board meeting of the Turner Institute for Adaptive Engineering had become a Cedar Grove tradition, held in the park where it all began. Version 1.0 of the Turner-Chen Comfort Integration System, Mike corrected, his eyes twinkling. Emily insisted we use both names, said it was only fair since it was her idea in the first place. Their daughter, and Sarah, could finally, legally, call her that now, was explaining her latest discovery to Claire and Marcus. At 10, Emily had become the unofficial bridge between the Institute's engineering team and their craftsman mentors, her natural ability to see patterns making her invaluable in developing their innovative approach to prosthetic design. "Remember what you said that first day?" Sarah asked, watching Emily gesture enthusiastically. "About everything trying to do what it's meant to do?" Mike's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Some things just need a little help remembering." "How?" From across the park came the sounds of the Institute's open house, local craftsmen teaching young engineers about traditional techniques, engineers showing craftsmen how to integrate modern technology. Romano had set up his garlic knot stand, now famous among visiting board members. Mrs. Martinez was leading tours of the school's new technical arts program, where Emily's original artwork about watches and time held pride of place. Sarah touched her prosthetic, now enhanced with Mike's intuitive adjustments and her company's latest innovations. "My father would have loved this," she said softly. "All these people learning to fix things together." "Catherine too," Mike added, pulling her closer. "She always said art was just another way of healing the world." Emily bounded over, her presentation board covered with drawings that combined mechanical diagrams with artistic flourishes. "Ready!" "I put both watches in the display case just like we planned, so everyone can see where it started." The three of them walked together toward the gathering crowd, past the bench where a chance encounter had started their story. The autumn leaves danced around them, gold and red and full of promise, just like that first day. "You know," Emily said thoughtfully, "when you fix something broken, you're not just fixing the thing itself. You're fixing all the stories it's part of." Sarah and Mike exchanged glances over their daughter's head, remembering 2 broken watches, 2 broken hearts, and all the careful repairs that had brought them here. "Speaking of stories," Mike said, reaching into his pocket, "your mother's watch and Sarah's father's watch aren't the only ones keeping time for us anymore." He pulled out a small box, presenting it to Emily. Inside lay a delicate timepiece, its face showing not just hours and minutes, but the phases of the moon and the turning of seasons. "For your 10th birthday," Sarah explained, her heart full as Emily carefully lifted the watch. "Because some stories are meant to keep going, generation after generation." Emily held the watch up to the autumn light, its gears ticking in perfect harmony with the 2 watches in the display case, marking time for a family that had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the things that break are just waiting to be made into something even more beautiful.